You are the Dungeon Master, and game night is just around the corner. Unfortunately, you've been so busy you've hardly even had time to think about the game. Sure, you've toyed with some story and encounter ideas here or there over the last week, but you're really not confident you like where they're headed, let alone what your players might think of them. The adventure module, or the published adventure, might be just the ticket, but do they really make for a good, high-quality D&D game? And isn't any good Dungeon Master creative enough to come up with their own homebrew material? Let's talk. Welcome to WASD 20. My name is Nate, and this is Dungeon Master's Journey, a series where I give tips, tricks, and considerations for Dungeon Masters, whether you are brand new or whether you're a veteran. I hope you'll get something out of this, as today we're going to be talking about adventure modules or published adventures. Now, published adventures sometimes get a bad name. A lot of people don't like that they, force you to stick to the script or run an adventure on the rails, so to speak. And I totally get that. I think that there are valid reasons not to run an adventure module. And yet, at the same time, over the years, I think I've encountered attitudes that are slightly elitist, we'll say, when it comes to adventure modules, thinking that anyone who would do such a thing is just less creative and less of a dungeon master than the rest of us. And I just want to say that I think it is absolutely okay to run adventure modules. I think that they are a valid and possibly even great way to enjoy this hobby. I think that there are several people who can benefit from adventure modules, and in this video I'll be discussing 4 characteristics of Dungeon Masters that I think would make them maybe want to run a pre-written, pre-published adventure. And then I will also be discussing tips for how to run a published adventure well. Once again, I want to emphasize that I'm not saying you should run an adventure module, and I'm not saying you shouldn't run an adventure module. I'm just saying that I think they are both valid ways of playing. Personally, I rarely run an adventure module, and usually when I do, I kind of hack it up pretty well. But I know that a lot of people do, and a lot of people really like them, and I want to give you some tips and some of my thoughts. So let's do it! The first Dungeon Master characteristic I think that could make someone want to run an adventure module would be the brand new Dungeon Master who has probably never or rarely even played Dungeons & Dragons before and just has very little context for how this all works and what this thing, tabletop role-playing games, is. I think that that is a really tough spot to be in without something like an adventure module to guide and to get you started. This was absolutely me, and so I have a lot of sympathy for this characteristic because when I first started, I had played 1 session of Pathfinder role-playing game at a local game shop, and then I wanted to run my own Pathfinder game, and I just had no idea where to start and how to do this. So for me, the beginner box, which I have on the shelf back there, was really, really helpful in just giving me a starter, kind of quick set rules, first of all, quick start rules, but also a starter adventure. That was just 1 adventure, and that's kind of problematic because I felt like it still wasn't enough, and I went out and I bought this huge tome that was probably a little bit overkill, The Rise of the Runelords Adventure Path. But I do really enjoy this book. I love this book. I'm glad I own it. And I did enjoy running quite a few sessions from it. It gave me a really good start. It gave me a feel for what this hobby is all about and how to create NPCs and a storyline and what encounters generally look like and all this stuff that I just had no context for because I was so new to the hobby. If you're playing D&D 5th edition, the starter set is a great way to go because it gives you the Lost Mine of Phandelver adventure. It's generally going to cost you about 15 or 20 bucks, and you're getting this Lost Mine of Phandelver adventure that is going to last you several sessions of gameplay, and I think that's a decent value. I'm going to put some links to a lot of the products I'm talking about in the video in the description below, so check those out. A lot of those are affiliate links too, so buying through those links really does help support the channel. Now, I know a lot of people will say, new Dungeon Masters, you don't need this, you can do it, you can make your own. And absolutely that is true, you can. But for a DM like me, I felt just like I couldn't. I just couldn't. Having that kind of security blanket of the adventure module was extremely helpful. I was nervous, I was kind of lost, and it was just taking enough off my plate that I could focus on some of the other aspects of the art and the science of dungeon mastery. The second characteristic that can turn DMs to the published adventure, I think, is the DM who is just short on inspiration. They just have trouble coming up with their own ideas, and I think that that is totally okay. For me personally, I am a high school teacher, and I find that my job consumes a lot of creative energy. I'm always dealing with different situations with students. I am planning lessons, and each semester I am trying to revise those lessons to better engage my students and get more of them where I want them to be. And when I come home from work, I am exhausted creatively. I have very little creative energy left when I have to run a D&D session in 2 days, and I usually do end up coming up with something. But often I do take inspiration from some of these books. So I think that the person who is just short on inspiration can find a lot of value in the published adventures. Perhaps this is just a really busy person who's always got a lot going on in their mind with their job and with their family. And for me, I do find that when I plan my own stuff, I at least do need a little bit of headspace to kind of go over ideas throughout the week as I think about the game. The third characteristic is the Dungeon Master who just wants to keep up with the stuff. And I don't know how to phrase that any better. But this is the Dungeon Master who wants to be in on the conversations. They want to be a part of the zeitgeist when the new D&D book comes out and the adventures out there. And I totally understand that. It's kind of like the desire to see a movie, to see, for example, Infinity War, because you know that people at work are going to be talking about it. By the way, I still haven't seen Infinity War, and when people talk about it at work, I just sit in my office with the door closed and cry. But anyway, so if you view these adventure modules as a part of the product line and you just want to keep up on the product line, then I think that running these adventures is a great way to do that. And when you do so, you'll be able to talk with other people about them online. You'll be able to share stories and tips for how you ran things differently, and that can be a lot of fun. And lastly, honestly, with Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, I feel like these are just good products. Like, these are good adventures. I've got a few of them here. I don't have all of them. And I've really enjoyed them. And each one that I have read has made me tempted to start running one of them. And I've run parts, but I've never run a whole thing, and I probably never will. But yeah, I think Wizards of the Coast is doing a good job putting out quality products here. The fourth characteristic of a DM that might drive them to consider an adventure module is the DM who is just very, very short on time. These are just really busy people, and I've got news for you folks. This is a bad reason to run an adventure module, because it actually takes a lot of time to read through these things. This is not light reading, my friends. We dive into these books, and they are full of dense text, lots of information on one page, story information, encounter information, logistics, and it's just not quick reading. So you're sitting there trying to wade through 10 or 15 pages of very dense text to prepare for the next adventure, and by the time you get through it all, you probably could have planned something a lot quicker. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that I think some people think these will save them time, and the experienced Dungeon Masters among us know that they won't, in general, save you time. Yes, coming up with your own ideas does take time, and for me, it's actually probably a lot more time than most Dungeon Masters. The gears are always turning, and I'm always changing things and revising things and thinking, no, I don't like that, and I should do this instead. So it does take me a while. But I think that running a published adventure is very time-consuming because you got to read it well, and you probably have to read it more than once. If you decide that running a published adventure is the way to go for you, then I urge you to consider these tips. First, as I mentioned before, you should read this through. You should read it through very carefully, and you should probably read it through more than once. These books are usually really good at giving an overview so that you don't have to read the whole thing. You kind of have a general feeling for where things are headed. You just need to read the section that you plan to run, and maybe a little more just in case your players move through it more quickly than you imagined. So for me, I will usually sit down and read it once, maybe a week or two ahead of time, and then I will read it once again the night before, or maybe the day of even. For me, that really helps me prepare because I don't want to be flipping through the book and trying to remember, oh yeah, what happens after that? I want to pretty much have it all up here. I have the book there as an aid when I need it, but I cannot be reading through 2 paragraphs of text and saying, hold on guys, here's the next room, let me look. That just doesn't work out so well. So you got to really know it well. My second tip for how to run an adventure module well would be to take notes. I find this especially important with monster stat blocks and other mechanical things like that, like maybe a trap or something like that. writing that down on a little 3x5 note card or on a sheet of paper, or sometimes even photographing some stat blocks. I just take my phone and I'll be snapping photos of stat blocks from my monster manual and I'll print them all out on one sheet, or maybe I'll just keep them on my phone or my iPad and I can more quickly flip through the pictures on my phone than I can flipping to the back of the book or flipping on multiple pages of the monster manual. I found this especially important when I was helping students at school in my tabletop RPG class who were trying to run the Lost Mine of Phandelver. In the Lost Mine of Phandelver, the one with the starter set, you're trying to run the adventure, and then you also have stat blocks in the back of the same book for the goblin and for the bugbear, and pretty soon you find yourself on the adventure page, and then you're trying to go to the bugbear page and then the goblin page, and it's just absolute insanity, and I don't recommend doing it. And I'm sorry, I'm getting a little worked up here, but you get the idea. So I absolutely made sure that my students had stat blocks on a separate sheet of paper, and I actually said, here you go, here they are, so you don't have to flip to the back of the book, because you don't want to do that to your players at the game and always be flipping around. And my third tip for running a published adventure well is don't hold your grip too tight on what they've given you here. You really need to have some flexibility, I think, to do it well. Your players might be okay and have just this understanding that this is just an on-the-rails thing, and that's the way it goes. And they have to be somewhat okay with that idea. But if you really just want to run a plain old good game of D&D, I recommend some flexibility. And maybe at some point you get to the point where you're actually veering from the path that has been laid out in the book significantly enough where you can just put that book back on the shelf and start doing your own thing. I think that's great. Now, if you run the book cover to cover and that's what the players want and that's what you want, that's totally fine. But having a little bit of flexibility can just make for so much of a better game because you can tie things into your players' backstories. You can be willing to say, hey, we need a little side quest here to explore this aspect of your backstory or your personal life or what's going on with your character. I think that's hugely important. If you are running an adventure module, I recommend using some of the tips that they usually give you for the players and how the players can build good characters that fit well in these stories. I'll give you one quick example. When I was running the Tales from the Yawning Portal, we were doing the Sunless Citadel, and at the end of the dungeon, I totally changed who the boss was at the end of the dungeon to be the uncle of one of my players. It took a lot of tweaking, and it kind of changed the main story of the dungeon to better fit in my campaign. And that's just one example of how you can be very flexible while still running what they give you. And this does point to the major downside of published adventures. They are on the rails. And sometimes as a dungeon master, I think it really is important to have some flexibility and be willing to change the story based on where the players want to go, to just delve into a little bit of a character backstory. A little side quest here or there I think can be healthy. Be willing to adjust to what your group enjoys. And sometimes there are just better stories that come out when things are able to go in more organic directions rather than trying to stick to script or stay on the rails. Lastly, I just want to give a quick plug to the Oath of the Frozen King. This is a 5th edition compatible adventure kit. It is not a published adventure in the traditional sense because what they are giving you here is kind of hitting that sweet spot between a published adventure and your own Dungeon Master prep notes. They're just kind of giving you a lot of tools and an overall very basic storyline with a lot of actually modular parts to piece together, as well as some tools to create some of your own content, like even your own monsters and traps and things like that. So I definitely recommend people check out this product. Absolute Tabletop is a partner with this channel, and you can check out a link to this product down in the description below. And if you buy through that link, it lets them know that I sent you. So for any Dungeon Master, check out the Oath of the Frozen King. I don't think you'll regret it. So I'd love to hear what you think. Do you like published adventures? Which ones do you think have done it particularly well? What are some of your favorites? And what tips would you share with people who are trying to run published adventures? Love to hear from you in the comments. If you have any questions, let me know as well. I want to thank you guys so much for joining me. I also want to thank my patrons for their support of this channel. I'm going to put their names up here. Patrons, you're amazing. These are people who support the channel on a monthly basis. You can learn more in the Patreon link in the video description. Thanks again, everybody. Take care. You'll see me again very soon.